Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Today is Wednesday, January 25th. We're here to discuss Managed Kubernetes and Cluster API. We are getting together on behalf of Cluster API, which is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. We are abiding by the CNCF Code of Conduct, so please be kind to one another and respectful. And with no further ado, I will share my screen and we can get started. I think this is what I want to share. So are we sharing the CAPI native managed Kubernetes doc?
Yes.
Great. All right. So I'll also link to the meeting notes. I recorded last week's discussion and I haven't updated that yet, so I'll do that today. So I'll paste this in chat really quick for folks who don't have it. So feel free to register your attendance there. Does anyone want to quickly say hi before we get started? All right, so I basically copy pasted last week's agenda and I added the proposal doc, so we can go ahead and quickly discuss that. Welcome, Kevin. I just see you just dropped in. So Richard has added a bunch of great commentary here to my initial sort of draft burst, as well as Winnie. And so I thought we could just do a quick 5-10 minute time box on that. And maybe that's all we have to worry about doing today in real time. And just further encourage folks to jam on this asynchronously. I know everyone's super busy. Maybe I'm just projecting. I'm super busy. I hope that's the same for everyone. Being super busy is good. So just a real brief overview for folks who haven't gone through this. I essentially wrote this. This is a new proposal doc that's meant to capture the scope of what we're working on here, of really trying to come up with a CAPI native solution for managed Kubernetes. So I'm trying to capture that scope as well as maybe start the process of getting some concrete proposals in place, and then we can start the process of evaluating those and choosing one to bring to CAPI. Richard added a bunch of great comments, and his takeaway from reading my initial draft, I think, seems to be, and I'll allow Richard the time to actually speak for himself. It seems to me that his takeaway is that this doc, this proposal is really in every way a continuation of the previous proposal with really the same scope, with the only difference being that now we are reevaluating the constraint of not updating cluster API. And so maybe there, is that true, Richard? Is that, do you feel that way?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So definitely want everyone else to have a vote on there. I'm in favor. I agree with Richard. So I'm glad he made that observation, because I think that his criticism of what I did is a valid way of saying that perhaps a better way of expressing that to the user community is more of a copy pasta or more referential links, less new material here. The more new material, or the more we try to sort of re-express the sort of same problem statement from the original proposal, the more it kind of obscures the tight relationship between those proposals. So I'm happy to basically stick to that goal of really making this a fork with a minor addendum that just says we're removing the constraint to update CAPI, which was a prior constraint that was essentially out of scope of the original proposal. And so my understanding is that, or my I don't know what the right word is, but what I think at this point is that we want to bring to the larger cluster API community the message that as a result of the previous spike where we had that constraint, don't update CAPI, we now have gained more confidence in a sort of opinion that updating CAPI is in fact good for the overall cluster API community, especially for managed Kubernetes. And so we're just going to basically take on the burden of advocacy ourselves and try to convince folks that updating CAPI is in fact the right solution. I wasn't there during those original discussions, so maybe I would lean on Richard and Winnie and maybe other folks to capture what it is about this point in time where we feel better about pushing back on that constraint. Richard and Winnie, do either of you want to speak up? What is the only thing that's changed really our sort of level of opinionation, or has something changed in CAPI where we anticipate that CAPI will sort of remove the constraint that was, because I assume that constraint came from the CAPI maintainer. So I'll just pause and let folks speak up.
Yeah, it did come from the CAPI maintainers, that constraint. And I think we didn't do the due diligence to not ignore that constraint, but still consider the options that didn't adhere to that constraint. So we just blindly followed that. Would it make a different outcome this time round? Maybe, maybe not. But at least we've actually gone through and said, well, these are the reasons why we think this change would be beneficial to manage Kubernetes. And it gives us a better place to argue from, I think, our case across, which we didn't do previously.
Right. Okay, great. I mean, if you don't feel like you did the due diligence back then, certainly I would encourage you to feel that you have now, because you did a lot of due diligence in the last year. Winnie, do you have anything else to add, or?
No, I agree with Richard. But what I think is when Richard and I were writing the original proposal, although we got the reviews from like you and Joe and other people, we didn't have this managed Kubernetes, like people who actually really cared about managed Kubernetes. So I feel like we didn't have like critical mass to like push our opinions. We were like, oh yeah, we work with like happy maintainers and do that. But I think like now we have like critical mass. If we want to make a change, that's my opinion.
I think that's a great call out. That's a great call. So I'll try to remind us to put that in the doc as just as a way of explaining the sort of cultural evolution of this space over the last year. Is we really, TLDR, we have more users, more interest. There's more to gain by getting this right now than there was before. I would also just add, and I'll put this in the doc, my observation over the last, say, 3 to 6 months, and somewhat surprising to me, is the very clear messaging from, at least from CapZ's managed Kubernetes community, that consistency is in fact like the #1 important thing. So when we went through the process, say, after KubeCon in the fall, of realizing that the work of doing the sort of in-place changes to Kappa and CapZ was going to be a lot of effort, we did find that was, as we suspected, sort of undesirable from our user community. So it was hard to make that justification for investing in that effort. But also they were not at large willing to drop the goal for consistency. That was still expressed like, no, we actually do want you to keep working on consistency. And so that's the thing that brings me back here and would justify this effort, because this is going to have the best long-term, this is going to be, more effort than simply going and refactoring the existing code bases. But I would argue that it's the more durable solution. So we'll get years of results from this, and it's worth it because the users really are asking for multi-cloud consistency. And so I don't want to take too much time, but I do want the folks who have taken their time to be here to feel confident in everything we're talking about, that you understand it, so you can feel, if time permits, you have the proper context and knowledge to participate in this document. So maybe I'm going to pause and let someone speak up if Richard and Winnie and I are kind of talking too quickly over things because we have familiarity with them. So Akinlulu, Kevin, John, Scott, Joe, anything about the sort of backstory of proposal V1 and this proposal V2 that isn't clear?
I'll be 100% honest. I haven't read this second document yet, so that is my next step.
Cool.
Yeah, I've started going over this document, and it makes all the sense in the world to me. I know multiple people that have not used CAPI for managed clusters because there is no consistency between them. So anything that brings that consistency, right? It's not just it's also the potential users that we don't get if we don't have the consistency because they look elsewhere for consistency. So I'm a huge supporter of this, and defined APIs and cluster API for this make all the sense in the world over just contracts that some people follow and some people don't, and whatever. Actually having a base for it in cluster API itself would be huge. From my perspective, and gains also a benefit for the, like, it can also explain better to the current users that you break why we're making this change, because we're upstreaming something into core CAPI instead of coming and saying, you know, we're just making breaking changes within the provider itself. It's a larger ecosystem story that can be told that makes it easier for some to swallow the breaking changes that would occur.
I think that's very, very nicely put, and suggests that you have a comprehensive understanding of what's going on. So that's great. All right, so I think that our homework for the next week is, at least for me, I will take Richard's feedback to heart and probably reformulate this sort of, you know, first pre-proposal materials, all this background materials, to more closely, basically remove a lot of language, so we can essentially say, hey, read this previous proposal because it's the same stuff. And the only difference is we're removing the constraint to update CAPI, and then we can move along toward the sort of goals and start working on concrete proposals. And so the proposal really is summary, motivation, goals are going to be a copy pasta of this previous proposal, so that for one thing, we've already done all this work once, and so we get to not have to redo that over again, and just make it like a, you know, English literature exercise or something like that. And also, I think it will have the outcome of encouraging folks to read this doc to get the full picture, which is, I think, really necessary to making the best decision. So if no further comments, 15 minutes of your time back.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. See some of you in
Thanks.
45 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.